The controlled detonation echoed through Riverside Park at 3:47 p.m., sending a shockwave that rattled windows 3 blocks away. Marcus Williams lay motionless on the concrete walkway, his prosthetic leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Insulin vials scattered like broken glass around his collapsed form. The acrid smell of explosive residue mixed with the metallic scent of blood as emergency sirens wailed in the distance. "Sir, can you hear me?" The paramedic's voice seemed to come from underwater as Marcus struggled to open his eyes. His vision blurred, the world spinning in slow motion as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The last thing he remembered was reaching for his medical bag, the one he'd carried faithfully for 3 years since his diagnosis, when the shouting started. 2 hours earlier, Marcus had been enjoying the autumn sun on his favorite bench near the duck pond. At 34, the former Army sergeant had found peace in these quiet moments, watching children play while he monitored his blood sugar levels. His service dog, Rex, a golden retriever trained to detect diabetic episodes, lay patiently beside him as Marcus organized his afternoon medications. The park buzzed with typical Tuesday afternoon activity. Joggers passed in steady rhythms, their breathing visible in the crisp October air. A mother pushed her toddler on the swing set, while elderly men played chess at concrete tables. Marcus felt grateful for these ordinary moments, so different from the chaos of his 3 tours in Afghanistan that had cost him his left leg below the knee and left him with type 1 diabetes from the stress and trauma. His medical bag, a sturdy black canvas messenger bag, contained everything that kept him alive: insulin pens, glucose tablets, emergency glucagon, test strips, and his continuous glucose monitor supplies. He'd organized everything methodically, a habit from his military days that now served a life-or-death purpose. Rex wore his official service dog vest, clearly marked with patches indicating his medical alert training. Margaret Thornfield approached from the walking path, her perfectly coiffed silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light. At 58, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her designer jogging outfit and expensive running shoes suggested someone more concerned with appearance than actual exercise. She'd been watching Marcus for several minutes, her pale blue eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Excuse me." Margaret's voice cut through the peaceful atmosphere like broken glass. "What exactly are you doing there?" Marcus looked up, surprised by the aggressive tone. "Just taking my medication, ma'am. Having a quiet afternoon with my dog." "That's quite a collection of equipment you have there." Margaret's gaze swept over his medical supplies with obvious disapproval. "And that bag looks suspicious. Very suspicious." Rex sensed the tension and moved closer to Marcus, his training kicking in as he detected his handler's rising stress levels. The dog's presence only seemed to agitate Margaret further. She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the screen as if debating her next move. "Ma'am, I'm a diabetic veteran. This is all medical equipment prescribed by my doctor." Marcus kept his voice calm and respectful, though irritation flickered in his dark eyes. "Rex here is my service dog. He's trained to detect when my blood sugar drops." "I don't care what story you're telling. You people always have some excuse." The words hung in the air like poison. "I've been watching you for 20 minutes, and that bag is packed with all kinds of devices and wires, in a public park, near children." The racist undertone in her voice made Marcus's jaw tighten. He'd heard similar comments throughout his life, but they still stung with fresh venom. "Ma'am, I served this country for 12 years. I have every right to be in this public park, managing my medical condition. Don't you dare play the military card with me. My late husband was a real soldier, not some..." She gestured dismissively at his prosthetic leg. "Not someone like you." The insult hit harder than any physical blow Marcus had ever endured. His prosthetic leg, a constant reminder of the IED explosion that had nearly killed him and two fellow soldiers, became a source of shame under her withering gaze. Rex pressed against his side, sensing the emotional distress. Margaret's fingers moved across her phone screen with practiced efficiency. 911. I need to report suspicious activity in Riverside Park. There's a black man with what looks like bomb-making equipment. He's got wires, electronic devices, some kind of weapon-trained dog. I think he's planning something terrible. Ma'am, please don't do this. Marcus stood slowly, his prosthetic making the movement awkward. I'm going to show you my veteran's ID and my medical alert bracelet. Everything here is legitimate medical equipment. But Margaret had already stepped back, her voice rising to attract attention from other park visitors. He's reaching for something. He's got a bag full of explosives. Someone help. Within minutes, the peaceful park transformed into chaos. The first police cruiser arrived with sirens blaring, followed quickly by two more. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, shouting commands that overlapped and contradicted each other. Marcus raised his hands slowly, Rex staying perfectly still beside him despite the commotion. Step away from the bag hands where we can see them. Officer Martinez, a young patrolman with nervous energy, kept his weapon trained on Marcus while scanning the crowd of gathering onlookers. Officers, I'm a diabetic veteran. That bag contains my insulin and medical supplies. I have identification in my wallet. Marcus's voice remained steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. My service dog is trained for medical alerts, not attack. Detective Sarah Collins, a 15-year veteran of the force, approached with more caution. Something about the scene didn't feel right to her experienced eye. Sir, we received a report about suspicious devices. We need to examine that bag before we can sort this out. Of course. Detective, I want to cooperate fully. Marcus gestured toward his medical bag. Everything in there is prescribed medication. I have documentation from the VA hospital. Margaret pushed through the crowd of onlookers, her voice shrill with manufactured hysteria. Don't let him fool you. I saw him assembling something. He's been here for hours, putting together some kind of device. The bomb squad arrived within 15 minutes. Their heavy truck and specialized equipment, turning the park into what looked like a military operation. Captain Robert Hayes, a gruff man with 30 years of explosives experience, surveyed the scene with professional skepticism. He'd seen enough false alarms to recognize the signs, but protocol demanded thorough investigation. We need to clear a 2-block radius, Captain Hayes announced to the assembled officers. Treat this as potentially viable until proven otherwise. Marcus watched in growing horror as yellow tape surrounded the area and loudspeakers ordered evacuation. Families gathered their children and fled, casting fearful glances in his direction. The playground emptied within minutes, swings still moving in the breeze like ghosts of interrupted childhood. Captain, please examine the contents carefully, Marcus called out as bomb squad technicians approached his bag with robotic equipment. Those insulin vials are expensive and literally keep me alive. I can walk you through each item. Sir, we appreciate your cooperation, but we can't risk civilian safety. Captain Hayes's voice carried the weight of protocol. If these are legitimate medical supplies, you can file for compensation later. The robotic arm picked up Marcus's medical bag, its mechanical movements rough and imprecise. Through the remote camera, technicians could see various electronic devices, wires, and small cylindrical objects that could potentially be mistaken for dangerous materials by someone without medical training. Those are glucose monitors and insulin pens. Marcus's composure finally cracked as he watched his lifeline being handled like a bomb. "Please, just let me explain what each item is." But the decision had already been made. Captain Hayes, operating under pressure from city officials and media attention, chose the safest course of action from a liability standpoint. "We're going to perform a controlled detonation. Everyone back another 100 yards." The explosion that followed shattered more than just Marcus's medical supplies. It destroyed his faith in a system he'd served faithfully, his sense of safety in public spaces, and his ability to manage his medical condition independently. The force of the blast knocked him to the ground, his prosthetic leg jarring loose, and his continuous glucose monitor ripping away from his skin. As Marcus lay on the concrete, his blood sugar levels began to plummet without his monitoring equipment and emergency supplies. Rex, trained to detect these changes, began exhibiting alert behaviors. But the chaos and noise made it impossible for anyone to understand what the dog was trying to communicate. Dr. Amanda Foster, an emergency room physician at St. Mary's Hospital, received the call at 4:15 p.m. A diabetic veteran was being rushed in with severe hypoglycemia, following what appeared to be a terrorist incident at Riverside Park. She prepared for the worst, assembling a team and alerting the trauma surgeons. When the ambulance arrived, Marcus was barely conscious, his body shutting down from critically low blood sugar levels. "We need glucose IV immediately." "Doctor," Foster ordered as they wheeled him into the emergency bay. His glucose meter reads 32. "How long has he been without insulin management?" "Patient reports his medical supplies were destroyed in a bomb squad operation," the paramedic explained while connecting monitoring equipment. "Service dog kept trying to alert us during transport." "Doctor," Foster's expression darkened as she processed this information. As a physician who worked closely with diabetic patients, she understood the critical importance of continuous monitoring and medication access. His medical supplies were destroyed by whom? Meanwhile, news crews had arrived at Riverside Park, drawn by reports of a terrorist threat and bomb squad deployment. Reporter Jennifer Liu of Channel 7. News began her live broadcast as the scene was still being processed, unaware that the narrative was about to take a devastating turn. This is Jennifer Liu reporting live from Riverside Park, where a bomb threat earlier today led to a controlled detonation by the city's explosive ordnance disposal team. Details are still emerging about the suspect and the nature of the threat. Detective Collins, disturbed by inconsistencies in Margaret's story, began conducting follow-up interviews with witnesses. The chess players who regularly occupied the park tables provided a very different account of the afternoon's events. "That young man comes here every Tuesday and Friday," explained Harold Morrison, a retired teacher who'd been playing chess during the incident. "Always polite, always with his service dog. He sits on that same bench and takes his medicine. Never bothered nobody." "And the woman who called it in," Detective Collins prompted. "She was circling him like a vulture. Could see her getting worked up about something. That boy wasn't doing nothing but managing his health condition." Harold's weathered face showed disgust. "Some folks just can't mind their own business." The revelation began to spread through social media as cell phone videos from the park surfaced. Multiple angles showed Marcus sitting peacefully with his service dog, clearly managing medical equipment, while Margaret paced nearby with obvious agitation before making her phone call. Attorney David Chen of the Veterans Legal Aid Society received an urgent call at 6 p.m. A fellow veteran was hospitalized after his medical supplies were destroyed in what appeared to be a case of racial profiling and false reporting. Chen had handled similar cases before, But the severity of this incident demanded immediate action. "I'm on my way to the hospital," Chen told his assistant while gathering case files. "Contact our civil rights partners and start documenting everything. This sounds like a Section 1983 civil rights violation, with potential criminal charges for false reporting." At St. Mary's Hospital, Marcus slowly regained consciousness as glucose IV fluids restored his blood sugar to manageable levels. Dr. Foster sat beside his bed, her expression grim as she reviewed his medical history and the circumstances that brought him to the emergency room. "Mr. Williams, I'm Dr. Foster. You're safe now, and your blood sugar is stabilizing." Her voice carried professional warmth, mixed with barely controlled anger. "Can you tell me about the medical supplies that were destroyed?" Marcus's voice was hoarse from the trauma, but his words carried the weight of a man pushed beyond his limits. 3 months of insulin, my continuous glucose monitor, emergency supplies, everything I need to stay alive, gone because someone decided I looked suspicious. The replacement cost alone will be several $1,000s, Dr. Foster explained, making notes in his chart. But the real issue is the medical crisis this created. You could have died from severe hypoglycemia. This isn't just property damage. This is assault on a disabled veteran. Rex, who had been allowed into the hospital room due to his service dog status, lay beside Marcus's bed with his head on his paws. The intelligent animal seemed to understand that his human had been hurt in ways that went beyond physical injury. By 8 p.m., the story had exploded across social media platforms. The hashtag #JusticeForMarcus began trending as veterans organizations, civil rights groups, and disability advocates shared the shocking details. Video footage from the park clearly showed the sequence of events, contradicting Margaret's emergency call. Colonel Patricia Hayes, retired Army and president of the Veterans Coalition, issued a statement that evening calling for immediate investigation and accountability. A decorated veteran was nearly killed today because someone decided his medical equipment looked suspicious. This is not just discrimination. This is attempted murder through willful negligence. The true scope of Margaret Thornfield's deception began to emerge as investigative reporter Jennifer Liu dug deeper into the story. Records showed that Margaret had made 17 previous 911 calls in the past year, all targeting people of color in public spaces. Each call alleged suspicious or threatening behavior that investigation had proven false. Even more disturbing, Liu discovered that Margaret's late husband had never served in the military, contrary to her claims in the park. He had been a civilian contractor who worked in military logistics, a detail she had apparently embellished to give her accusations more credibility. This isn't a case of mistaken identity or overzealous concern for public safety, Liu reported in her evening news special. This is a pattern of deliberate false reporting, targeting minority citizens exercising their rights in public spaces. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. City officials, who had initially supported the bomb squad's actions as appropriate caution, found themselves facing questions about why Margaret's history of false reports hadn't triggered intervention sooner. District Attorney Rebecca Martinez held an emergency press conference at 10 p.m., her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine outrage. "We have reviewed the evidence and witness statements. Criminal charges will be filed against Margaret Thornfield for filing false police reports, reckless endangerment, and hate crime enhancements." The announcement sparked both celebration and calls for broader systemic changes. Veterans groups and civil rights organizations demanded accountability, not just for Margaret, but for the city officials and police procedures that enabled such a tragic escalation. Marcus spent 3 days in the hospital as doctors worked to stabilize his diabetes management and assess the psychological trauma from the incident. During that time, his room became an unexpected gathering place for supporters, fellow veterans, and advocates who wanted to show solidarity. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, who had served with Marcus in Afghanistan, drove 6 hours to visit her fellow veteran. "You saved my life twice in Kandahar," she told him, tears in her eyes. "Now it's time for all of us to save yours by making sure this never happens to another veteran." The Veterans Coalition announced plans for a massive protest march to coincide with Marcus's release from the hospital. Within hours, veterans from across the state confirmed their participation, many planning to wear their dress uniforms to highlight the contrast between service and the treatment Marcus had received. Attorney David Chen worked around the clock to prepare both criminal complaints and civil lawsuits. The case presented clear violations of Marcus's civil rights under federal law, while also highlighting broader issues of disability discrimination and racial profiling in emergency response protocols. This case represents every veteran who has come home to find themselves treated as enemies in their own country. Chen explained to reporters gathered outside the courthouse, "We will seek full accountability and systemic changes to prevent future incidents." The march took place on a crisp Saturday morning, 6 days after the incident at Riverside Park. Over 2,000 veterans, family members, and supporters gathered at the state capitol, many wearing military uniforms and carrying signs demanding justice and policy reform. Marcus, still weak from his medical crisis but determined to participate, spoke to the assembled crowd from a wheelchair, Rex sitting faithfully beside him. His voice carried across the silent gathering, every word weighted with the pain and determination of a man fighting for more than personal justice. "I didn't serve 3 tours in Afghanistan to come home and be treated like a terrorist for managing my diabetes in a public park," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But this isn't just about me. This is about every veteran, every person with a disability, every citizen who deserves to live without fear of being presumed guilty because of their appearance or their medical needs." The crowd erupted in sustained applause, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. "We demand accountability, not just from the person who made the false report, but from the systems that allowed a decorated veteran's life-saving medication to be destroyed without question. We demand training for first responders on disability issues and medical equipment. We demand an end to the presumption of guilt that costs lives." Mayor Jonathan Pierce, facing enormous political pressure and potential federal intervention, announced a comprehensive review of city emergency response protocols. The review would include mandatory training on disability awareness, racial bias prevention, and de-escalation techniques for situations involving medical equipment. Captain Robert Hayes, the bomb squad leader who ordered the detonation, submitted his resignation amid growing criticism of his department's procedures. "I followed protocol as it existed," he stated in his resignation letter. But that protocol clearly failed a citizen who deserved protection, not persecution. Margaret Thornfield's arraignment drew protesters and media attention from across the country. Dressed in an expensive suit and flanked by high-priced attorneys, she maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her pattern of false reporting. "My client was acting as a concerned citizen, reporting what appeared to be suspicious activity," her lawyer argued to a skeptical judge. She had no way of knowing the true nature of the defendant's activities. Judge Patricia Santos, a veteran herself who had served as a military attorney, was unmoved by the defense arguments. The evidence shows a clear pattern of targeting individuals based on race and ethnicity with false reports. This particular incident nearly resulted in the death of a disabled veteran. Bail is set at $50,000. The investigation into Margaret's background revealed even more disturbing details. She had been involved in homeowners association disputes that disproportionately targeted minority residents, had complained about service dogs in public spaces multiple times, and had used social media to promote racially charged conspiracy theories. Federal investigators began examining whether Margaret's actions constituted a broader pattern of civil rights violations that could warrant federal hate crime charges. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation, signaling the seriousness with which federal authorities viewed the case. Meanwhile, Marcus focused on rebuilding his life and medical management routine. The community response had been overwhelming, with donations pouring in to replace his destroyed equipment and cover his medical expenses. A GoFundMe campaign reached over $100,000 within a week. More importantly, medical device companies and diabetes advocacy organizations had stepped forward to provide Marcus with upgraded equipment at no cost. His new continuous glucose monitor included advanced features that would help prevent future medical crises, while a specialized medical bag, clearly labeled with emergency contact information and medical documentation, was designed to prevent confusion. Dr. Emily Watson, a renowned endocrinologist and diabetes researcher, volunteered to oversee Marcus's care and serve as an expert witness in the legal proceedings. What happened to Mr. Williams represents a fundamental failure to understand that medical equipment is not suspicious. It's life-sustaining technology that deserves protection, not destruction. The legal proceedings moved forward on multiple fronts. Margaret faced 5 felony counts, including filing false police reports with hate crime enhancements, reckless endangerment, and interfering with emergency services. If convicted on all counts, she could face up to 15 years in prison and substantial fines. The civil lawsuit against the city expanded to include violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 1983, civil rights violations, and negligent training of emergency personnel. Expert witnesses would testify about the easily identifiable nature of diabetes management equipment and the failure of basic investigative procedures. Public opinion had turned decisively against Margaret as more details of her false reporting pattern emerged. Her social media accounts, preserved by investigators before she could delete them, contained numerous posts expressing hostility toward minorities, veterans receiving disability benefits, and service animals in public spaces. The trial began 6 months later in a packed courtroom, with national media coverage and protesters on both sides of the issue. Marcus, fully recovered and equipped with state-of-the-art medical monitoring technology, testified with quiet dignity about the impact of the incident on his life and health. "I nearly died because someone decided my medical equipment looked suspicious," he told the jury, Rex lying calmly at his feet in his official service dog vest. But the real tragedy is that this could happen to any veteran, any person with a disability, any citizen whose appearance doesn't match someone's expectations of who belongs in public spaces. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Margaret's pattern of false reporting, her racially motivated social media posts, and the near-fatal consequences of her actions. Video evidence from the park clearly contradicted her emergency call, showing Marcus engaged in routine medical management, not suspicious activity. Expert testimony from Dr. Watson explained the critical nature of continuous diabetes monitoring and the life-threatening consequences of destroying a diabetic person's emergency supplies. Mr. Williams could have died from diabetic ketoacidosis or severe hypoglycemia. This wasn't property damage. This was creating a medical emergency through willful destruction of life-saving equipment. The defense struggled to counter the mountain of evidence, instead focusing on Margaret's claimed fears, and the pressure of living in an uncertain world. Their arguments fell flat with a jury that included 2 veterans and a nurse who understood the realities of medical equipment management. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Margaret's composed facade finally cracked as the verdicts were read. The reality of significant prison time and social disgrace setting in for the first time. Judge Santos sentenced Margaret to 8 years in prison, the maximum allowed under sentencing guidelines, with eligibility for parole after serving at least 4 years. Additionally, she was ordered to pay full restitution for Marcus's medical expenses and participate in racial bias counseling during her incarceration. "Your actions nearly killed a decorated veteran who served this country with honor," Judge Santos stated during sentencing. "Your pattern of false reporting terrorized innocent citizens and wasted emergency resources that should have been available for genuine crises. The sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the harm you caused to both individuals and community trust." The civil lawsuit against the city resulted in a landmark settlement of $2.8 million, along with sweeping policy changes in emergency response procedures. The settlement established new protocols requiring medical consultation before destroying potential medical equipment and mandated disability awareness training for all emergency personnel. More significantly, the case prompted federal legislation requiring standardized identification systems for medical devices and protection protocols for service animals during emergency responses. The Marcus Williams Protection Act, signed into law 18 months after the incident, became a model for states nationwide. Marcus used his settlement funds to establish the Veterans Medical Rights Foundation, an organization dedicated to preventing discrimination against disabled veterans and ensuring access to medical care and equipment. The foundation provides legal assistance, emergency medical supply replacement, and advocacy training for veterans facing similar challenges. 2 years after the incident at Riverside Park, Marcus returned to the same bench where his life had nearly ended. Rex, now a certified therapy dog as well as a medical alert dog, accompanies him on regular visits to speak at schools, police academies, and medical conferences about disability awareness and the importance of looking beyond appearances. The park itself has changed. A memorial plaque near Marcus's favorite bench commemorates the incident and serves as a reminder of the importance of treating all citizens with dignity and respect. The plaque reads, "In memory of the day we learned that medical equipment is not suspicious. Service dogs are not weapons, and veterans deserve protection, not persecution. May we never forget the cost of presumed guilt." Margaret's family, devastated by her actions and the revelation of her hidden prejudices, issued public apologies and donated to veterans organizations in an attempt to make amends. Her adult children, who claimed they were unaware of the depth of her racism, committed to supporting racial justice initiatives and disability rights advocacy. The bomb squad underwent complete restructuring, with new leadership emphasizing de-escalation, civilian consultation, and respect for citizens' rights during emergency responses. Captain Maria Santos, who replaced the resigned Captain Hayes, implemented innovative protocols that balance public safety with individual rights and dignity. Dr. Foster, the emergency room physician who treated Marcus, became a national advocate for medical equipment recognition training among first responders. Her research on emergency discrimination against disabled patients led to new medical school curricula and continuing education requirements for healthcare providers. The story of Marcus Williams and the destruction of his medical supplies became a catalyst for broader conversations about racism, disability rights, and the presumption of innocence in American society. Universities began including the case in civil rights law classes. while sensitivity training programs used it as an example of how unconscious bias can have life-threatening consequences. Detective Sarah Collins, who had questioned the circumstances from the beginning, was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to lead the department's new Bias Crime Investigation Unit. Her experience with the Williams case informed new protocols for investigating suspicious person reports and identifying patterns of discriminatory false reporting. Marcus's story spread internationally, inspiring similar legislative reforms in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. The case became a symbol of how individual acts of prejudice can catalyze systemic change when communities demand accountability and justice. On the third anniversary of the incident, Marcus organized the first annual Veterans Medical Rights Awareness Day in Riverside Park. Hundreds of veterans, family members, and supporters gathered to celebrate progress, while acknowledging the work still needed to ensure full equality and dignity for disabled veterans. Standing at the podium near the memorial plaque, Marcus addressed the crowd with the same dignity and strength that had carried him through his darkest moments. Rex, now showing gray around his muzzle, but still alert and devoted, sat beside him, as always. 3 years ago, someone decided that my medical equipment made me look dangerous. Today, we stand together as proof that fear and prejudice cannot ultimately triumph over truth and justice. Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. We've made progress. New laws protect medical equipment. Training programs educate first responders. Legal precedents establish accountability for false reporting. But our work isn't finished. Every veteran, every person with a disability, every citizen deserves to live without fear of being presumed guilty because of their appearance or their medical needs. The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus continued with the passionate intensity that had made him such an effective advocate. We honor the progress we've made by continuing to demand better. We remember the day my medical supplies were destroyed, not as a tragedy, but as the moment our community chose to stand up and say, never again. As the sun set over Riverside Park, casting long shadows across the peaceful scene, Marcus reflected on the journey from victim to advocate, from isolation to community leadership. The incident that nearly killed him had ultimately saved countless others by exposing systematic failures and prompting meaningful reform. Rex nudged his hand gently, a reminder that his blood sugar was dropping, and it was time for his evening medication routine. Marcus smiled and reached for his clearly labeled medical bag, now equipped with external identification tags and emergency contact information that left no room for misinterpretation. Children played on the nearby playground, while their parents watched with the comfortable confidence that comes from living in a community committed to protecting all its members. The park buzzed with the same peaceful activity it had always hosted, but now with the added security that comes from hard-won justice and systemic change. Margaret Thornfield remained in prison, serving her sentence and participating in the court-mandated bias counseling that was slowly, painfully, opening her eyes to the harm her actions had caused. Her journey toward understanding and redemption would be long, but early reports suggested genuine progress in recognizing the humanity of those she had tried to dehumanize. The legal precedents set by Marcus's case continued to influence court decisions across the country, providing protection for disabled individuals facing discrimination and establishing clear consequences for those who weaponize emergency services against minority citizens. As Marcus packed his medical supplies and prepared to leave the park, he noticed a young veteran with a prosthetic arm sitting nervously on a nearby bench, clearly struggling with his own medical management routine. Without hesitation, Marcus approached with Rex at his side. "Need any help, brother?" Marcus asked gently, using the term of endearment common among veterans. I remember those early days managing all this equipment. It gets easier. The young veteran looked up with relief and gratitude, recognizing not just a fellow soldier, but someone who understood the unique challenges of coming home with invisible wounds and visible adaptations. I'm still figuring it all out. Some days I feel like everyone's staring, wondering what's wrong with me. I understand that feeling completely, Marcus replied, settling onto the bench beside his fellow veteran. But here's what I've learned. Taking care of your health in public isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. You're managing your condition, living your life, and that takes courage. As the two veterans talked, sharing experiences and practical advice about navigating the world as disabled former servicemen, other park visitors passed by with respectful nods, rather than suspicious stares. The cultural shift that began with one man's fight for dignity had rippled outward, creating a more understanding and inclusive community. The story of Marcus Williams and the day his medical supplies were destroyed by a bomb squad serves as a powerful reminder that individual acts of courage in the face of injustice can create lasting change. From a moment of near-fatal discrimination grew a movement that protected countless others, proving that, even in our darkest hours, the possibility for justice and redemption remains alive. Rex, faithful companion through the worst and best of times, wagged his tail as Marcus stood to leave the park. The golden retriever seemed to sense that this place, once a site of trauma and fear, had been transformed into a symbol of hope and community resilience. Walking slowly toward the parking lot, his prosthetic leg moving with practiced ease, and his medical bag clearly visible and proudly carried, Marcus Williams embodied the promise that from the ashes of injustice, a stronger and more just society could emerge. The echo of his footsteps on the concrete walkway carried the sound of progress, of healing, and of a community that had chosen to stand together against prejudice and fear. The sun had fully set by the time Marcus reached his car, but the park remained illuminated by streetlights that cast warm pools of light across the walkways. Children's laughter still echoed from the playground. Parents called out bedtime warnings, and the ordinary sounds of community life continued in the space where extraordinary change had begun. As he drove away from Riverside Park for another evening, Marcus Williams carried with him not the bitter memory of the day his world nearly ended, but the powerful knowledge that sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the foundation for the most meaningful change we can create. In a world still struggling with prejudice and fear, his story stood as proof that justice, though sometimes delayed, could still prevail when communities chose courage over comfort and truth over convenience.